What are index funds and how do they differ to ETFs? That is what we're going to be tackling today. Welcome to Get Started Investing, a show where we help you make the most of your money. My name is Bryce, and as always, I'm joined by my equity buddy, Ren. How are you going?
I'm very good, Bryce. Very excited for this episode. As always excited.
Yep.
We have got one of the most common questions we hear about ETFs and about how you can invest in them. We've just come off the summer series where we've spoken a lot about ETFs, and this question that you've flagged, what are index funds, what are ETFs, we've heard a lot. And so we're going to answer it today. One of the people who asked that question was Lisa.
Hey guys, thanks for your show. Loving it, learning something every episode. So really grateful for that. Still new, still trying to work a few things out, and I'm wondering if you can just do a little bit of a chat on the index funds, what options there are out there. I'm still a little bit unsure as to how to find those, what that looks like. It's all a little bit of a minefield and getting a bit confused with ETFs and indexes. So for those of us who are newbies, please could you help us just shout out a bit on the index. Clear the mud. Thanks, guys.
Love it. Thank you, Lisa. Firstly, if you want to leave a question just like Lisa did, there'll be a link in the show notes or the description for you to leave us a voice note. A lot to cover in that question, Ren, but firstly, just want to acknowledge that it can be confusing and overwhelming, a lot of jargon in the industry, but it is very simple once you do understand it, and will help you get through that by the end of this episode.
Yeah, so we're going to cover what are indexes and what are ETFs and how are they different and how you can understand them. And then we'll answer the other part of Lisa's questions about how you can navigate this world and try and find different investment options. But I think let's start with one of the most common points of confusion. Indexes and ETFs, the terms are sometimes used interchangeably, and they're often confusing about what each means. I think the starting point is that they are not the same. They do mean different things. So let's go one by one and then talk about how we use them together. So let's start with indexes.
Okay. Indexes are a way of measuring change over time. And when it comes to investing, it is a way of measuring the change in the entire market over a period of time. And so when you talk about index investing, it's a style of investing where we are investing in the index, in what we were about to go through, call it the top 200 companies in Australia is an index, and that index tracks the change of those 200 companies over time. The S&P 500 is an index. It tracks the 500 largest companies in America over time, and then we can invest in that.
Now let's stop there because you didn't say the word ETF at all. And I think that's important to stress that an index or an index fund doesn't need to be an ETF. It's just a way to invest in that whole market and benefit or lose as the whole market changes over time. So the index is what you invest in. And if you think about your other choices about what you invest in, it might be other styles of investing in the stock market. It might be a thematic fund. It might be an actively managed fund, but it could also be other asset classes. It could be a bond fund. It could be an infrastructure fund. So when we talk about index funds, they're what we can invest in, because then that leads to ETFs. And ETFs aren't the what, they're the how.
Yes.
They're the how we invest in the fund.
Let's take those two examples I used, the ASX 200, the S&P 500. The index is the what. We're taking the top 200 companies here in Australia. The ETF is the how, and it is a wrapper that allows me in one trade to invest in that index. And so you'll find that there will be many ETF providers that give you an ETF for the same index. Like BetaShares allow you to invest in the top 200. Vanguard allow you to invest in the top 200. Well, to be specific, it's 300. But they all are the ETF wrapper or the organizations that give you the ability to invest in the underlying index.
So to put it all together, the index investing came about really with Vanguard in the 1970s. And when you first, if you wanted to invest in an index fund at that time, you had to invest in a private fund. You had to fill out paperwork and send a check in the mail, and that was how you invested. You weren't investing in an ETF, it was an index fund. And really what ETFs have done is they've brought the online shopping experience to investing in everything, but in this case, in index funds. And so now you can do it through your broker, you can do it with one click, you can do it with smaller amounts of money, no paperwork, no sending checks in the mail. That's what the ETF has done. They've changed the how. But in the what, the index existed before ETFs. So once you understand that these two things are different, the index and the ETF, you start to understand a lot of the jargon when it comes to these funds. You know, there might be a bond ETF, it's the what and then the how, or there might be a private bond fund. Again, like you both invest in bonds, the what is the same, but how you invest in them is different. Similarly, you might have an index ETF or an thematic ETF. In that case, the how is the same. They're both ETFs. The way you invest in them is the same, but what you're investing in is different. One's an index and one's actively managed.
One of the easiest places to start to understand if you're investing in an index fund or perhaps an actively managed fund or a thematic fund is the title. In most instances, the title will either have the word index or will have a reference to what index it is tracking. So for example, the BetaShares A200, it's called BetaShares Australia 200. Vanguard's VAS is Vanguard's Australia Index Fund.
Yeah.
Australian Shares Index Fund.
Yeah.
IVV, which is the S&P 500, it is iShares ASX S&P 500. So you get sort of an illustration of the index that you're investing in through the name. That's not to say it's always going to be the situation, but it's a handy start.
Yeah, and on the flip side, if you see a fund that has brackets active ETF or brackets hedge fund or brackets complex ETF, they are indications that the fund is an actively managed fund. So they're the opposite to index funds that we were talking about earlier.
So Ren, to close out, Lisa wanted some specific help on how to navigate this world, where to start, because as I said, there's over 350 odd listed. It can be confusing.
Yeah, it can be confusing. It's almost getting to the point where it's like picking stocks. There's so many options. For me, there's probably two answers to this question. The first one would be pick some of the biggest ETF issuers in Australia and actually just go to their website, because they all have a product list, and then you can filter based on or you can scroll through and look at different investment styles and geographies and the like. So you could go to the Vanguard website, the BetaShares website, the iShares website, and the GlobalX website. And between those four websites, you've probably covered 80 to 90% of the market.
Yes.
So that would be number one. Number two would be there are platforms that try and aggregate all ETFs into a list. Morningstar has one. We'll include a link to that in the show notes, of all Australian ETFs. And it's good. It's just obviously there's so much information that it's hard to aggregate it all into a way that's clean and searchable and gives you everything you need.
Yeah.
So there's always trade-offs, but between the issuer's website and some of these third-party data sources and the Equity Mates Facebook discussion group,
Yes.
that's probably the best way to navigate it.
Yeah, come and join us in the discussion group. We'll also put a link in the show notes to previous episodes we've done on VDHG and DHHF. These are ETFs that are like all in one, where you don't actually have to choose beyond one ETF. So we'll put a link in the show notes and check out our book as well, because all the information is there.
Keep listening to the podcast.
Yeah, it's all there.
Now, Lisa, if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by this conversation and by this choice, I just want to reassure you and leave you with one stat that you don't need to do too much. So if you had just picked the American stock market index, biggest stock market in the world, some of the most well-known companies in the world, and 5 years ago at the start of 2000, if you had invested whatever amount, however much you could, into the S&P 500 ETF, which in Australia would be IVV or SPY. There's a number of ETFs in Australia that track it. In 5 years, you would have doubled your money.
Nice.
Let's say you put $1,000 in at the start of 2020. You would have gone through COVID. You would have gone through the stock market crash of 2022, where the US market fell 18% in a year. You would have gone through cost of living crisis, inflation, interest rates, Trump's re-election, conflicts around the world, Russia, the Middle East. But your $1,000 5 years later would be $1,956.
Wow, there you go.
You'd have doubled it in 5 years by doing nothing.
So good.
So if you're feeling overwhelmed, remember you don't need to do a lot to get started.
That's why we love investing. How good. Thank you, Lisa, for your question. As I said, you can ask a question by leaving us a voicemail. There will be a link in the show notes or description. Also, if you are not subscribed to our daily newsletter, then let me tell you, you are missing out, because we send you the best and most important headlines from around the world to your inbox, and in less than 10 minutes, you can be updated on everything that is going on in the world of business. And if you prefer listening than reading, then the good news is we've also turned that newsletter into a daily podcast. It's called Headlines by Equity Mates, and you can find it in your podcast player now.
Okay, that's probably enough plugs for today.
So many.
Make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening or watching so you can hear more plugs in future episodes. But Bryce, I think that'll do us for today.
Sounds good.